In this next video, I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of existentialism, and in particularly existentialism within two contexts, a literary context and a psychological context. And a lot of the existential philosophers were trying to actually move away from these traditional notions in philosophy towards more of a synthesis of philosophy and meaning regarding the word and spoken word and thought in particular. And they were doing this particularly through literature and literary mechanisms, but also direct experience, in particular phenomenology, which has to do with perception and direct perception. And so you see at the same time a different philosophical school that's emerging that's also associated with two specific problems to do with words and the interpretation of those words, and meaning, as well as the meaning that we can gather from words and the limitations of meaning within particular objective contexts rather than in regards to subjective context. Because the analytic philosophers were more concerned with the nature of things rather than the nature of the self, and were more interested in explaining direct phenomenon related to perceptions of the world environment rather than the self and environment, or the self and the surrounding environment. And phenomenology was very, very useful to the existentialists, but not as useful to the analytic philosophers. So the existentialists were also operating in relation to where a lot of the psychological thinkers at the time were developing their ideas. But they were developing these ideas from different chains and different angles. But some of the psychologists and existentialist thinkers, and a large portion of the existentialist thinkers, drew from a phenomenological body of research, and particularly direct phenomenology related to what could be perceived and experienced, and we're wrestling with the nihilism that's associated with appearances and this idea of authenticity, and why in people's words, not necessarily why things or matter, were at times inauthentic, or didn't have these concrete truths to them, didn't have an epistemology, a body of knowledge, a system of knowing that was stable or as reliable as the explanations that we got from, say, science or physics in particular, and these natural philosophy and natural science. What was more true seemed to come from direct experiences, or even the words that we wrote. The meaning of a word was more clear to being meaningful than the meaning at the time that was gathered through perceptions. At least that's what a lot of the existentialists were contending with. And the meaning that came out of their philosophy really wrestled with these two concepts of literature and psychology as being central to this new emerging way of doing philosophy, and philosophizing in particular, that was previously done more in terms of a class structure. And you had less people actively participating in philosophical discussions, and more it was the individuals who were allotted leisure time or time to actually think about these ideas and had the opportunities to be able to communicate these ideas freely that were able to do that. And oftentimes these were individuals who were highly educated across multiple fields, and often historically what was prized mostly was the sciences and particularly mathematics, that made it more difficult to publish philosophy based off literary terms, and science, to discuss scientific ideas off more of these literary discussions and psychologizing regarding it. That still happened to a large degree, but in limited contexts that were highly filtered out through these class systems that were more idealized, or not idealized, but based off ideologies that came from religions. Because a lot of these thinkers you'll see occurring, particularly this is more to do in the Middle Ages, with thinkers like St. Augustus Aquinas, and a lot of the thinkers during the pre-enlightenment age. Where in the Enlightenment age, that's when we start to see more individuals interested in the social science and psychologizing philosophy, and also in these literary aspects of philosophy and direct perception. Even Locke and Berkeley's another one of these more religious individuals, however, but Locke, who had a lot of skepticism of religion even in his philosophy, talk directly about direct perception as a guide to truth and more of these psychological processes. So there's this slow shift towards a way of philosophizing involving a literary stream and a psychologizing stream that you'll see early thinkers like Nietzsche really tackling through various methods that involve experimenting directly with writing and seeing how that impacts his philosophizing and philosophy, and really putting stuff out there in terms of this new mode of philosophizing that's called existentialism, and which is grappling with these two ways of thinking. And you'll see more of the literary elements as we move towards the end of the existential philosophizing period, and in which now I think we're in a synthetic period, which comes shortly after. You'll see a lot of the existentialists, the famous ones like Camus and Sartre, engaging in fictional work, and even Simone de Beauvoir. But she was also much more engaged in the cultural scene and in more of these other forms of self-expression, that she explored various phenomenological aspects of character and the self, and various aspects of the self, and also with her philosophy in particular, femininity as well as feminism, and existential feminism from her direct experiences, which is also deeply concerned with this literary and psychologizing way of approaching the world in a logical, epistemological, contextualizing way that has direct applications to natural philosophy, philosophy of science, and philosophy of psychology. And these methods, again, they primarily come from this direct perceptual philosophizing, as well as a experiment with the literary methods that have their origin in psychology, the direct perceptual aspects of philosophy, slowly moving away from direct phenomenology, again with these roots in psychology, and that are very heavy in thinkers like Freud and Jung, who are also during the time of this existential period, where all these existentialist thinkers are merging literary methods with these direct perceptual and phenomenological approaches to knowledge and meaning, and responding to these deeper questions concerning life, such as what is the meaning of life? Is there a self? How can we lead more meaningful lives? What is the good life? And if a life's completely meaningless, why live at all? Which was where the existentialists really end off in their philosophy. They're really starting to grapple with where the psychologists are starting to make breakthroughs in regards to, well, if there is no meaning to life, then there's no purpose of being alive. But the absurdity of life comes that we often do want to live, and therefore there should be a meaning to life. And so is there a meaning to life? And the psychologists are really discovering that, well, yeah, there's a meaning to life, but it's just not what you think. And they're just not really interested in the same dialogues that the existentialists are having at the time, which is producing this difference in philosophizing, because the psychologists are trying to do much more what the analytical philosophers are doing, and they're trying to develop a science of psychology, which is just emerging from the works of Wilhelm Wundt. And I'll be talking more about this in an upcoming lecture that I'm working on. There'll probably be a video lecture first, and then from there I'll see if I can do a live lecture. But this is just an introduction to the existential viewpoint, and a little bit of history of existentialism that regards this development in philosophy between literary philosophy and a philosophy of psychology that's organic to existentialism, and which really pioneered
literary existentialism and psychological existentialism. So that's all I wanted to say for this video. I hope you enjoy. Have a good one. Bye.